All right, this is going to be a pretty in-depth, pretty heavy, spoiler-filled book review of Halo Epitaph, written by Kelly Gay. It just came out about a week ago. I did listen to the Audible version, read by the voice of the Didact himself, Keith Zarabica. And I gotta say, holy smokes, this book answers almost every single question I think any Halo fan has had, from any weird mystery from Halo 4, Halo 5 Guardians, or Halo Infinite, at least the opening portion of that. It completely wraps up the Reclaimer Saga. It does a great job of putting a lot of mysteries to bed, including the Warden Eternal, the Didact, the Mantle of Responsibility, just to name a few. And these are major thematic things that fans have been really wanting to know about for a very long time. In all of my review and discussion of the events post Halo 5 Guardians leading into Halo Infinite, everybody was wildly confused as to why Cortana's martial law suddenly just ended. What made her suddenly just decide to kind of give up her world or galaxy control with the Guardians and to kind of face Atriox one-on-one and essentially self-terminate herself. This book explains the roots of that. This book explains why the Warden Eternal was such a pain in the butt during Halo 5 Guardians and why he couldn't be killed and why he was so hellbent on defending the ring. This explains what the Mantle of Responsibility really is, and it explains the real kind of villain behind all of this. The Didact's motivations and why he did what he did, and so much more. So, if you are a fan of Halo and you enjoy the games and you want to dabble a little bit into the extended lore of this universe, to me, this book does it better than any Halo book I've ever read, and I would argue this is an absolute 100% must-read book for anybody who is curious about the extended Halo universe. This will explain so many things, and I am so frustrated with how 343/Microsoft has handled a lot of the lore up to this point. This is without a doubt the gold standard when it comes to actually being able to explain something and fill in the gaps. Now, whether or not Kelly Gay wrote an absolute miracle and was able to take all of these kind of half-developed concepts and put them in an exquisite wrapper, or if this was actually written and then somehow redacted to be put into book form later, remains a mystery. I'm going to go with the former because I've read Kelly Gay's other works and I think they're amazing. To me, you need to get her in the writing room for Halo 7. She needs to be a part of this. Her contribution, taking Greg Bear's original Forerunner trilogy and being able to kind of cut away the fat and explain it from a very high level. Her ability to tie in all the gaps of what we call the Reclaimer trilogy/Reclaimer Saga, and her ability to make everything fun and open and enjoyable is really second to none, and I absolutely commend her. This is without a doubt one of the best books I have ever read. It opened my eyes to so many things of a universe that I absolutely obsess over, and I cannot say enough good things about this book. If you don't want any more to be spoiled, stop the video here. I will put timestamps at the beginning of the video, so if you want to jump to the review section later, you can do that. Now, let's jump into the spoiler section, and that is where I'm going to focus on a lot of crazy things. I wrote a loose idea of what I want to talk about, but this book tackles so many different subjects. It's hard to kind of put them in buckets that are easily dissectable. There is a lot of overlap, but I'll tell you the things that stood out to me personally as a fan. First and foremost, they explain everything between Cortana and Didact. The phrase took you long enough now has such a different meaning to me. It was the phrase that Halsey said to John in Halo 5. And it's also the phrase that the librarian says to the Didact. Yes, they get reunited at the end of the book. And I think that in of itself, such a full circle moment for me, the whole idea of the genetic imprint of what was before as it translates now into humanity, the idea that we are still, the battles and the wars that were fought before our time are still kind of ingrained in our bones. And this idea of the reclamation and this idea of, hope springs eternal in the cycle of life, to me, that really just struck a pin in that whole argument. And I loved that the book closed on that line. So yes, I started with the end, but I just want to say that to me, that's how big of a scope that this book, I think, actually was able to achieve. So this book, really at its core, is the redemption of the Didact, the main villain in Halo 4, who has had so much additional stuff written about him. He was really, really crapped on. His character was crapped on after the events of Halo 4. He gets written into a 3-arc throwaway comic book where he's stabbed in the eye and thrown into basically, the Promethean soup, so to speak, where he is kind of redigitized, undigitized, composed, and he's gone. And that we thought was the end of him. And a lot of fans were like, oh my God, I can't believe you brought this villain back after Halo 4 just to kill him off in such an unceremonious way. Thankfully, as I said, I think Kelly Gay did an amazing job of bringing him kind of out of mothballs and giving him a real ending. So I'm so glad that there's this kind of pseudo retcon that went into place to really kind of flesh out his story. Throughout this story, the Didact is basically in this digital form. And he is starting to really understand and contemplate why he did what he did in his life. He's able to witness things in this kind of ghostly, ethereal presence. He has lots of interactions with the Warden Eternal and with Cortana and with other major characters in the Halo universe, at least in the extended universe, like the Lord of Admirals, for example, from the humanity side. And this really does kind of talk about his hero's journey and his arc. This book does answer unconditionally what happened during that time frame. And we find out that the story of the Didact was about his redemption. And all those scenes in post-Halo 4, and all those scenes in Halo 5, and all those scenes, even some of the scenes in Halo Infinite, the Didact was there, kind of witnessing everything from this ethereal, plane of existence. So he saw the UNSC Infinity approach Zeta Halo. He saw your first interaction with some of the monitors. He saw the chief and the other team fighting the Warden Eternal. And he was the one who implanted a lot of these seeds of doubt into Cortana that ultimately led to her kind of self-sacrifice when Atriox approaches. He even saw Cortana setting and shooting off one of the rings heading out towards Dosiak to destroy the kind of homeworld of the Isharum. So he was there in the background the whole time, kind of pulling the strings, or at least trying his best to influence things. And it was so interesting to watch his journey in self-reflection, to learn that the world and the life that he came in and this absolute hate he had for humanity, he actually allies with the humans at the end and actually kind of walks off into the sunset with humanity arm in arm as a newfound friend, realizing and atoning for the sins that he had created in the past. And I think that is such a cool way for him to go. So much better than the crap that they gave us in the comic book. I thought the game did a pretty good job, the Halo 4 game, but that character was so rich, and seeing how he influenced so many other things, I'm glad this book was written about him and for him, and for that, that's why I loved it so much. So, as we talked about with the Didact, kind of his history, we find out that his parents were actually outcast, which is what makes him so violent and such a warrior servant early on. His parents were involved during the kind of overthrow of the Builders, when the Builders were kind of taking over, essentially. And as the rings were being created and as all of these other worker rates were taken away, Didact's parents were involved in that, and he was kind of outcast, and he learned to grow on his own. He was kind of not really left for dead, but he was kind of shunned aside. He was picked on, he was bullied as a child, and that's what made him rise to so much anger and power as he got older and stronger as time goes on, which was really, really cool. And I love that the idea of him rising up to that is like he almost took it too far, right? Like he was too much of a villain. And in this book, he kind of like dials it back and uses his immense power for good rather than just to self-control. His ultimate goal is to reclaim the mantle of responsibility. You hear that term thrown out time and time again in the Halo universe. The mantle of responsibility, the idea that absolute power should be the rule of the world, that might is right. And we find out that the mantle of responsibility in this book is not just meant for him. It was designed for everyone. And the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely is the seeds he sows into Cortana's mindset, which is ultimately what makes her back off during her engagement with Atriox. It's the Didact telling her, you have too much power. The martial law that you've imposed on the world with the Guardians is hurting you and is hurting other people. And as a result, you're causing more harm than good. By closing off the domain, this kind of computerized afterlife in a sense, by closing that off to everyone and only allowing select people in, you're hurting the people that are in there. There's lost souls in the universe. And on top of that, it's making you lust to use that power more, which is in turn hurting more people. And Didact was absolutely responsible for getting those thoughts into Cortana's head, which was really, really cool. Now understanding ultimately what the mantle of responsibility is, and understanding that it was truly designed for everyone, that the Didact essentially busts open the gates at the end, allowing everybody, including humans, including his darkest, deepest, rivals that he had with like the Lord of Admirals, for example, to allow them to come into the domain and to find peace and to, settle, like, kind of like taking away heaven almost, right? Like you're taking away people's afterlife, their kind of claim to, resting. To open that back up changes so much. We also learn in this that both Cortana and the Didact were acting the way they were because of the Gravemind, the true big bad. The Gravemind capturing Didact and manipulating and turning him. The Gravemind capturing Cortana, we saw that in Halo 3, manipulating and turning her and changing her. It's the Gravemind is the true villain here. And maybe one day we'll actually get to encounter him and fight him, although he is a be-all, end-all kind of malevolent presence that it just exists omnipotently in the background. But the fact that he was involved in so much of this really does reframe and almost makes it feel like the Didact and Cortana were actually victims to the Gravemind. The games kind of framed it more as Cortana went mad with power. But when you kind of read this book, it's almost framed as in the Gravemind touched her and manipulated her and made her into this kind of evil entity. And you feel sympathy for her character, which I gotta admit, after playing Halo Infinite, I felt absolutely no sympathy at all for Cortana. I could not stand her. I was so frustrated with what they did with her character, and I felt that they really ruined her kind of involvement in the universe. But now understanding it and those deep conversations in this book that Cortana has with Didact, particularly towards the end of the book, I think really kind of framed my thoughts on her differently, and that's why it had such an impact with me. As I said, this book picks up really right at the end of Halo 4. You see a lot of Halo 5, the Warden Eternal, leading up to Halo Infinite. We find out that the Warden Eternal is actually kind of this self-defense mechanism that was created by all of these other kind of guardians, this Haruspis group that was in charge of defending and protecting the domain. And it was kind of this dark, sinister, almost like congealation almost of all of these entities into one. And that's why you fight him so many times in Halo Infinite, because he can kind of be anywhere, anytime. The Didact ultimately kills kind of his true form inside the domain and causes the Warden Eternal to lose immense power. So whatever Warden Eternals are still left out in the world, when they die, they're dead. which is a really big deal because you think about how annoying this guy was in Halo 5 and how he just kind of doesn't show up anymore. This explains that. This explains why he was so annoying. This explains his unloyal and unwavering kind of contempt, but understanding of what Cortana is trying to do and why they're this kind of false ally that they have throughout the story. The Didact was ultimately responsible for defeating, using that kind of raw warrior power he had. The Didact was responsible for destroying the true Warden Eternal, which allowed Chief and Locke to kind of finish the events of Halo 5, which I thought was really, really, really cool. We find out that Cortana's control to the domain to block the access to everyone was actually, her idea of just allowing certain people in. Again, this idea of absolute power corrupting absolutely. The Didact has a long discussion with her and explains to her that she's actually hurting the things she thinks she's protecting. She is basically, kind of the overly protective mom, if you want to think of it that way, not allowing society to flourish and grow in a way that they should. And the fact that people are quote unquote subservient to her and kind of, catering to her needs and her whims is solely out of fear. And she's actually causing more harm than good, putting the world in martial law. She's taking away the experiences and the livelihood of a lot of people. And ultimately, she's causing more damage. And getting kind of her to stop and reflect on that is really what leads to when Atriox appears and Cortana basically destroys the ring because she sees the damage that it causes. Even though that absolute power could be used in a good way, nobody alone should have that kind of power. The mantle of responsibility, so to speak, should not be given out to really anyone. It should be everyone simultaneously. And I love that connection was made, and it really does reframe the events of, I think, the beginning of, like I said, Halo 5, and definitely the ending of Halo Infinite for sure. Additionally, in this book, like I said, I think it's the end of the Reclaimer Saga. I think this does a very good job of kind of answering all those questions. And I can't really think of a book in the Halo universe before that actually completely laid out everything out so peacefully. This was a very natural ending and a very natural conclusion to a lot of story threads that were floating for a very long time. And I really have to give it to Kelly Gay for doing such a phenomenal job of taking so many sloppy, loose stories and actually composing a very well-written, standalone book that does such a phenomenal job of closing out that universe. When Cortana tells the Didact at the end, "I am what I dare," then she kind of understands that she has become the villain. That really does seal so many story threads. The Didact being able to finally return to visit with his wife at the end when she says, "Took you long enough." I talked about that some moments ago. But the idea that their war is over, the fight is over, he gets a happy ending now because he has truly understood the librarian's plans, and he now truly understands what the mantle means to him and to everyone, and he can finally rest. He doesn't have to fight anymore. He's not an evil person anymore. He's redeemed himself, and he has righted a lot of the wrongs that he has done in the past. Yes, he still has murdered zillions and millions of people, and he was still a total pain in the butt in Halo 4, but he kind of understood, and he gets that hero's ending that I think he really deserved. And I loved it for that. There were so many other plot threads in this. There was explanations of old Halo 2 and Halo 3 maps that we played. There was an explanation, a lot of the art and the unique stuff we see on the wall. And maybe I'll get into those videos at a later date. I don't know. There's a lot of lore deep diving here that does kind of punctuate a lot of really unknown points. But I think clearly, definitively, without any shadow of a doubt, everybody who reads this book will take away so much greater understanding. It makes me want to go back and replay Halo 4, knowing that the Didact is in the background manipulating the events. It makes me want to go back and replay Halo 5, knowing that the digital Didact is now in the back of the world, kind of manipulating the events. And it makes me want to watch that kind of beginning scene of Halo Infinite and then fast forwarding to the end when you enter into that kind of composer room where you learn that Cortana kind of gave up everything and she says she's sorry to John, and she kind of self-deletes and turns off the Halo ring, kind of giving back that mantle and that power. Again, knowing that the Didact was there arguing with her is so pivotal to the story. I cannot say enough good things about this book. The fact that I didn't read it. The fact that the audiobook is read by the voice of the Didact. This guy is an absolute gem of an auditor. I loved reading it. It was insanely captivating, and I can't wait to see what happens next. I haven't been this excited about a Halo game in so long because we finally have a clean slate. There were no non-understanding points of like, oh, well, what happens here or there, or why did this happen? Everything has been laid flat. We have a true, brand new, clean slate beginning going into whatever Halo 7 turns into. Obviously, there's still some carryover with some of the main human characters in the modern era and John and the weapon and their relationship. But in terms of why things were the way they were, the mess that was created when Cortana went rampant, the mess that she created with the Guardians and this kind of martial global law, the mess that the Didact left behind, the understanding of what the librarian was really trying to explain in the life she was trying to flourish, knowing that they had to essentially eradicate the environment to stop the flood, and ultimately what the Gravemind is still up to as he floats out in the background, once again, unscathed of all the decisions that he's made. All of these things are now laying very, very flat. I love this book so much. Thank you so much to Kelly Gay for putting this together, and for Keith Zarabaika for reading it. It is an absolute gem. Even if you got to the end of this video and you still haven't read the book, go back and read it. I know there's stuff I missed, but it will put a smile on your face, and I absolutely teared up at the end. The Didact getting the happy ending he deserved hit me right in the feels. I am so proud to be a Halo fan right now, and I'm so excited to see what major adventures lay next, because I think we can all soundly put a pin in what happened behind us. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.